road. I mean, you have been in semis, you've been on motorcycles, you've been in a Corvette, you've been in limousines, you've traveled the road in some ways, but the one thing we haven't really talked about is I know because I know you've told me you have, some hitchhiking that you've done along the road. And I think about in hitchhiking, I know people still do it, but it was so common in the 40s, 50s, 60s. People really did travel that way, and I know you did. And I thought it might be fun for folks to hear some of that story.
Yeah. Hitchin. I've got a plethora of hitchhiking stories.
Okay, maybe one or two would be good. Not a plethora.
First of all, how many of you have ever hitchhiked?
Ooh.
Good.
Awesome.
Well, we're all endangered species now. You know,
it's true.
You really don't see many hitchhikers, and I guess for a good reason. But as Ken said, back in the day, it was perfectly good. If you were a vagabond or a student, or in my case, in the military, boom. If I was coming out of California to go home to Missouri, wearing my Marine uniform and toting a sea bag, I'd get up to LA and I'd see that sign, Route 66, and I felt like I was halfway home. Of course I wasn't. But I'd stick out my thumb and boom, I'd get a ride all the way home, you know?
Yeah.
Met some wonderful people that way. A very interesting hitchhiking story with me and Route 66 took place in about 1969. I'd been out of the Marines, out of the University of Missouri. Suzanne and I were out in Santa Fe, where I really came of age as a writer. I got my master's degree in literature on the plazas of Santa Fe and Taos. And I would write stories for small magazines, little magazines, papers, $25, $50, you know, just making a living. You know, I was still wearing my old worn Marine combat boots, and most of the time didn't have 2 dimes to rub together, but I made my rent, and I was doing my struggling writer bit, and it paid off. Well, one of the magazines I wrote for was called Sage Magazine, and it was a good literary magazine, but they also did some pretty hardcore feature stories. And Emo Hoffman, the editor, asked me to do a story on Black Mesa. Black Mesa is out in Arizona, near the New Mexico border. It's out really near Kingman. So I thought, okay, and he said, they're building a big power plant out there, a big smoke belching power plant, and they're encroaching on some of the Hopi Indians' sacred land, including Black Mesa, which is a holy site to them. You know, and of course the editorial this country has been encroaching on Indians since the Pilgrims got here. This was nothing new, but it was really a damn shame that this was taking place. So I took the assignment. Terrence Moore, a photographer who some of you know, he's probably the dean of Route 66 photographers, was already out in Arizona doing some preliminary groundwork. He was driving around his old black and white Ford station wagon, the skunk, we called it, and he had his black Weimaraner, Jemima, and he was getting the lay of the land. So I needed to join him out there. I didn't have a car, so I got a ride with friends down to Albuquerque, right down Central Avenue, Route 66 in Albuquerque. And I started moving out of town. And I got to the base of what's called 9 Mile Hill. Goes right up to the crest. And I was able to get a local ride about halfway up 9 Mile Hill. At the top of 9 Mile Hill, you turn around and there is the Rio Grande Valley, and there's Albuquerque. There's the Sandia Mountains, all spread out before you. This was the first sight people saw if they were headed east. They'd come up from 66 and they'd see it there. But for a lot of people, for us, it's always a westward road.
Yes.
For people moving west, Dust Bowl migrants, tenant farmers who were banks had foreclosed on them, like they did in Oklahoma quite a bit. Okies, Arkies, Dust Bowl pilgrims, following the scent of oranges and lemons, came up that 9 Mile Hill, chugged up that hill, and then they turned around, and for them it was kind of like, that was a big jumping off point to see that city, the Duke City below them, and what lay ahead. So before I could get down to Albuquerque, I noticed those boots were getting pretty thin. And you're going to have to take my word on this. This is not a sea story. This is true. And it has a happy ending. So don't freak out.
Okay, that's good.
I went down to a little old shoe store and walked in there, and I found a pair of what looked like pretty comfortable, cheap shoes. I had like, I don't know, $3.50 in my pocket. So, when it looked good, I grabbed those shoes and ran. I ran out of the store like a delinquent fullback. And I put those shoes on, and that's what I was wearing when I'm going up 9 Mile Hill. Well, I couldn't get a ride at all. It was people were going by, motorcycles, few trucks, pickups up, and I just couldn't get a ride. And finally, I looked down, and coming up the hill are 5 trucks, and they're all loaded up in the back with tarps over them. And they were going pretty slow up the hill, grinding through the gears. And when they got up to me, the first truck, they all cut their eyes over and looked at me. A bunch of guys in that truck. There were men in all those trucks, and they all looked at me, but they kept driving. And I thought, well, and they got up to the top of the hill, and I looked up there, and they all did a U-ey and came back down the other lane, passed me on the other side, did a U-ey and came back up the road, and the lead truck stopped right by me. They had a change of heart. So I talked to them, and only 2 or 3 of them spoke some English. They were all French. They were French Canadians.
Absolument.
And their cargo in all of those trucks were sleighs, like Santa's sleigh, fancy sleighs from Canada, and their destination was Los Angeles, where they were to be bought by interior decorators for people who wanted to put a sleigh in their living room and look out over LA or Malibu or wherever.
What everyone does, yeah.
You know, and
wow.
The one guy explained to me who had some English, he said they didn't speak Spanish or English very well. They didn't speak any Spanish. And he said, look, he explained their mission, what we're doing, and I thought that was rather novel. And he said, but we'd really, you know this road. And I said, yes. Would you ride with us as sort of a guide? And I said, I can not only do that, I can even relieve a driver now and then. I'll get you out there. I'm going as far as Kingman, Arizona, but by then you'll be on your way. Don't worry. So I climbed aboard and we took off. What a journey that was. We drove all through that afternoon and into the night, all night long. And we went on the old road, of course, and I took them by the Laguna Pueblo.
Nice.
I took them by all those strings of towns. Villa Cubero, New Mexico, which is a great little spot. Had a fine cafe and motel. Ernest Hemingway stayed at the Villa Cubero for several days when he was traveling east, and that's where while he was there, he wrote some pages of Old Man and the Sea, which I always thought was amusing, writing that book and landlocked in the high desert. But
fond memories for him.
I told them all these stories. We watched song dogs, coyotes run through the lights ahead of us. I told them about the stars, and I taught them little songs, little ditties, and they taught me some little French ditties
I bet
too.
they did.
But I gave them a little bit of Woody and a little bit of Hank Williams and a tad of Dylan, and they enjoyed it. And I'd move around. Sometimes we'd stop and stretch, and I'd get in another truck. A couple times I drove for a while, and we got way out there, and we stopped near Gallup, out of New Mexico, Arizona border. Went to a Lotaburger, and I did the negotiations.
Right.
So I ordered a whole bunch of green chili cheeseburgers and fries, such, and these people were kind of odd at this Lotaburger, but they brought these big sacks up, and I thought it didn't take them very long. They boomed. So we took the sacks, got back in the trucks. Before we even fired the trucks up, these guys were digging in, and they were yelling at me, and I opened up my bun, and there was no meat in it. None of the burgers had meat in it at all. So,
okay.
I picked two of these Frenchmen. I said, "You boys come with me." And I got out of that truck, and like a Marine Corps adjutant, I marched right to that Lotaburger with these two angry Frenchmen behind me. And I said, "This isn't right, folks." And I said, "You're going to square it away now." They not only squared it away, they gave us back our money.
Even better.
I don't know if it was intentional or just dumb, but it was quite a deal. And I'm sure the French wondered how Americans eat.
Yeah, the meatless hamburger. It's like,
Finally, through the night, you go through Seligman on that great stretch of 66 in northern Arizona, and we get to Kingman. Now, Kingman's where I'm going to get off, because I'm going to go from there down to Bullhead City on the Colorado River, where they built this big power plant that's belching over Black Mesa and every place else. And that's where Terrence Moore was waiting for me in the skunk.
nice.
So I got out of the truck, and all of them came around me, and we shook hands all the way around. I wished them luck peddling the sleighs.
Oh, yeah.
I told them where to go, what to do, gave them a few pointers, and we said adios. And I turned around, looked for a ride down to Bullhead City, and I hardly put my thumb out. Then a deputy sheriff stopped and said, "Where are you going, down to Bullhead?" And I said, "Yep." He said, "Jump in." So I rode down to Bullhead City, and I see off near this little mesa, I see that black and white Ford, Terry Moore. And there was Jemima dancing around, and I got with Terry. And he said, "You got new shoes?" And I said, "Yep." Those boots were worn out. And we went to work. and we spent 2.5 days there. I was interviewing people at the power plant. We went up to Hopi, interviewed people there. It was a tremendous day. Terry is taking pictures. The Hopis were very cooperative with us. It was just tremendous. I had a plethora of material for this story. And then we were all so sunburned. Then we got back in the skunk, and Terry said, I'll drive you all the way back to Santa Fe. So we went lickety-split back to Santa Fe. I typed up that story. I was writing in longhand in the car. I got in, typed up that story, took it to Emil Hoffman. He looked at it. He said, this is a good piece. And for all of that work, I got $75.
Oh, man.
Now, the first thing I did when he paid me is I got that check cashed, and I went straight to the shoe store. I walked in, there was this clerk. He looked at me. I went over and stuck some cash in his fist and walked out. I'm sure he didn't know what the hell was going on.
Probably not.
That was the first thing I did with that money. The
That's
second
awesome.
thing was
That's awesome.
I went to Connie's Market and bought some grub and came home. But that is one of my memorable hitchhiking stories.
That's awesome. Wow. Wow. Wow.